Welcome to Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the show. It's a Friday afternoon on the eve of UVA-Duke in Charlottesville. Chris Graham, I'm joined by Jeff Fife here on the show, and Jeff's going to sort of take over. He's done this numerous times for me in the past. He's a great host, and he's going to make me answer some questions, or at least delve into some topics, and I think it's going to be a good discussion. Hey, Jeff, how you doing, man?
Doing fantastic. It's when the listener gets the opportunity to call in.
You're the voice of the listener, yes.
That's right, the voice of the listener. I read, I listen, and then I fire you questions. And enough times, that you and I talked, I just figured let's turn it into a podcast. So it's good to be back on the AFP Street Knowledge site, and sending some things your way, because I love picking your brain, and I love the way you think about the joys of Virginia sports. So I've been, an avid reader and listener of some of your work this week, and you've been prolific. And one of the very interesting topics that I found were you and Jerry on Thursday, the Jerry Ratcliffe Show podcast, we're talking about sort of UVA's momentum and their ceiling. And it felt like, as Jerry commented, you guys that, Tony Bennett seemed to be a little bit more intense right now. Like he knows there's potentially something special coming out of this group. And I wanted to deeper dive into that with you and sort of get your opinion on this. What do you think is the ceiling of this Cavalier team? How do they compare to the 2018-19 squad, and how far can they go?
I actually wrote a column about this afternoon as well. I thought when Jerry and I discussed that yesterday, it was a really interesting kind of thought process to go through there. From a pure talent standpoint, it's hard to say that any UVA team will ever match up that 2019 team. And I'm sure at some point in the future there will, but that will be the measuring stick for a while, no doubt. 6 guys who played on that team, who played in that championship game in the rotation. 6 of these 7 guys who played in that game ended up in the NBA at some point. A couple of them are still bouncing around in the G League trying to get there full time, but that was a pretty talented team for Virginia. I'm not sure if there's 6 guys in this rotation this year. Tony's got an 8-man rotation. I'm not sure if 6 of these guys are NBA guys or not. Maybe, I haven't done a full count what I project there. And maybe we can do that as an out loud kind of exercise here too. But whether or not he has the level of talent he's got, I think he's got more flexibility with his rotation than maybe even had in 2019, which was key to that championship team's success. I noted in the column today that, this time 4 years ago, I got to do my math here. 2019 is 4 years ago now. The very weekend that we're in here, we were getting ready to play Duke at home in Charlottesville. UVA was getting ready to play Duke on a Saturday night in Charlottesville. LeBron James was in the house. That was the Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish team for Duke. Obviously a pretty talented team. And Virginia in that game, let me pull that story up so I can refer, because I did all the heavy lifting on this already, so there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. The lineup in that game, though, was different than it was going to be when Virginia played in the NCAA tournament and then eventually into the Final Four in the championship game. Starting lineup for Virginia in the game 4 years ago this weekend was Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, DeAndre Hunter, Jack Salt, and Mami Diakite. So 2 centers essentially starting with 3 guards. Braxton Key played 27 minutes that game. K.A. Clark played 24 minutes off the bench. Jay Huff played 10 minutes off the bench. Fast forward to the championship game that Monday night in April. It was Jerome, Guy, Hunter, Clark, Diakite. Basically 4 guards and a power forward. Diakite being a power forward. Braxton Key got 28 minutes off the bench. Jack Salt, who had been starting, got, all season long, got 4 minutes off the bench. Jay Huff got 3 minutes off the bench. That was Jay Huff's total for the Final Four. He got 3 minutes total in the Final Four. Jack got 13 minutes in the Final Four. But in the Elite 8 win over Purdue, Jack was on the floor for 34 minutes. So what I'm kind of getting at there is lineup flexibility is key. There are some teams and certainly some fan bases that say, boy, we would love to just know who the starter's going to be at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and then just know that. If you're a Carolina fan, for example, Armando Bacot is a starter at center. There's no question about that. What Tony Bennett values, and when his teams are the best, is when he can go from game to game and match up to the other team and make them play his style of play by saying, all right, like 4 years ago, Jack Salt's going to start this game and play 34 minutes. Okay, Mama Diakite is going to start this game and Jack Salt's going to play 3 minutes, and he has that this year. He can start Ben Vanderplas. He has the last 6 games at center, a 6'8", 3-point shooting center. He started Caden Shedrick 14 of the first 15 games this season, a 6'11" traditional center, who I wouldn't surprise doesn't get to start tomorrow. I'd be surprised if he doesn't get to start tomorrow against Duke with their big front line. If you look ahead to the NCAA tournament, then if Virginia's playing a team that goes 4 guard, 1 small 5, a 6'6" or 6'7" center, do you want a big guy out there chasing around a little guy who shoots threes, or would you rather have Ben Vanderplas? Well, we got Ben Vanderplas. We didn't have Ben Vanderplas or a guy like Ben Vanderplas 4 years ago. And so, you can match up with a 4-guard team. You can match up with a big team because you can go out there with a big lineup. You can put Vanderplas and Gardner and Shedrick on the floor at the same time. You can do that. He's got 2 point guards who play most of the game together. He's got 2 point guards who are as good or better than any other point guard in the country. He's got 2 of them. He's got, Jaden Gardner, who has been scoring well of late, but if Gardner struggles, he's got a guy in Ryan Dunn who can come right in. He played 30 minutes a couple weeks ago in a game and had a great game, 5 points and 8 rebounds in that win over Wake Forest. So you got an option there. Armand Franklin, when he struggles, which last couple games he has been struggling. You've got Isaac McNeely who can step right in and do different things, and the different things he does better than Armand Franklin. So he's got flexibility at more positions than he had 4 years ago. Again, the overall level of talent might not be as good, but that flexibility is there. And, when I think about it, it's going to sound, weird to say, but the only team that worries me and the only team that should worry anybody when you look ahead to the NCAA tournament would be a Purdue, just because of that big guy in the middle, the 7'4" guy who could do a lot of things and it's hard to guard. And, nobody's going to be able to check him one-on-one or even with post doubles. But other than that, I think Virginia matches up with anybody in the country. And it's because of what Tony has in his 8-man rotation.
So if you take the mad scientist metaphor, is he still stirring up the concoction? Is he still experimenting with that lineup? Are we going to see different scenarios and different starters? And does it matter if you start how many minutes you're going to get at the end of the game?
That's right. The answer to that is it doesn't matter if you start. It matters who finishes the game. We saw that in the Carolina game in Charlottesville, which is what started the tinkering that that Bennett has been doing the last few weeks. He injected Ben Vanderplas in at the 5. Virginia was struggling on offense mightily, not just in that game, but they had been for a few weeks, dating back the whole month of December and in the first couple games in January. He puts Vanderplas in. It gets the offense rolling, and then now what you're seeing is the defense needed some adjustments, and that's what you saw. Boy, I don't think I've seen this Virginia team play as good on defense as they did Tuesday night in that win over NC State. 50 points surrendered to a team averaging 80 a game, and it was legit. They played great defense in that one. So no, I think you don't put anybody in Penn in the starting lineup if you're a Virginia fan, because you're going to need a pencil and you're going to need to write lightly. There's going to be an eraser needed for some of these some of these games, because he's going to be able to match up with the other team. And within game, even I wouldn't say that even the guys who start the first half are necessarily going to be the guys who either start the second half or play predominant roles in the second half. It's just going to matter as to what the needs of that game are. And he didn't have this flexibility last year. What's interesting about this group is basically everybody's back from last year, the key guys, and the only different guys he really has are Ben Vanderplas, the transfer from Ohio, and Isaac McNeely, the freshman from Polka High School in West Virginia. But because of those two guys and what they can do, Vanderplas can play 3. He can play in the backcourt. He can run off screens. He can play 4. He can play 5. And McNeely can bring the ball up the court. He can initiate the offense, but he can also stand out there, hit threes. He can drive to the basket. Because of what they can do, they have freed up the other guys to be the best they can be. So, and Dunn, throw Dunn in there too. Dunn hasn't played a lot lately, but his athleticism, he's going to be a guy like I think his ceiling is DeAndre Hunter. That's obviously a very high ceiling. DeAndre was a number 4 pick, but I can foresee the development of a Dunn being, in a couple years, 3 years, maybe a DeAndre Hunter type player. So, no, I don't think it matters who starts. I'm not even sure if it matters from game to game who starts and finishes, because I think it's going to be a game by game basis kind of thing for Tony Bennett.
Talk about Dunn ceiling. Let's talk about the team as a whole ceiling. I mean, we've seen the good with NC State in that defensive effort. We've seen the bad, stretches of the bad and stretches of ugly. Is there great in this team? Have we peaked? Was NC State the best we're going to see? Or do you feel like that there's more, there's another level that Virginia can really climb to?
I mean, that was a nice win over a good team. That NC State team's already won 19 games this year. They are legit. They were 8-1 in their last 9 coming in. But that said, no, I don't think this team has peaked, because I still don't think Tony has figured out what it's going to be in a sense. I mean, he's still figuring out. He's got his 8-man rotation set. Now it's a matter of what lineups are best at, to start the game, to get through the game. How can I, use my rotation? How do I sub, my guards out, especially Kihei Clark and Reese Beekman, to get maximum, to make sure that they're together on the floor as much as possible, but also that, they're with the right guys when one has to be off the floor to get some rest. They can't play 40 minutes a game. He may use more minutes from them in the NCAA tournament, certainly, but you want to get there with them still having some legs left. So no, I think that you'll see tomorrow is going to be interesting. As we're recording this, Duke is, they're not as talented as some folks might have thought coming into the season. And we're going to talk about Duke more later in the show, but Duke, because they have to replenish their roster, they re-recruit a new team every year. Some years they have Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, and Cam Reddish, and some years they have that group that didn't make the tournament. And this year's not, they're in the middle of those two extremes, but they are big. And this is going to be the biggest team Virginia will play unless they play Purdue. Duke goes 7'1", 7 foot, 6'8" at their starting lineup in the front court. They've got 6'10" backups at the 4 and 5 positions. And so, and their guards are big. I mean, Jeremy Roach is 6'2", is the only guy under 6'5" that plays regular minutes for this team. So, it'll be a challenge size wise for Virginia. Virginia has been playing great when they play other small ball type teams, and so that'll be a challenge. But after this, I mean, they've already beaten Carolina once. They'll have to go down to Chapel Hill. Baycott won't be hurt in the first minute. Even though Jalen Williams, the guy who replaced him, played Baycott minutes there for quite a while in the loss in Charlottesville. So no, I think what you're going to see here is Tony's going to still be working to figure it out. And, the way I look at it, there's, what is it? Let's see, Virginia is 10-3 in the conference. So 7 games left in the regular season, plus whatever they've got down in Greensboro, at least one or 2 games, maybe 3 games. He's got 8, 9, or 10 games to figure out how he wants his team to look when the ball goes up in the air in the first game of the NCAA tournament in a few weeks.
When a deeper dive into Duke, since we started talking about them, how do they rate in comparison to the remainder of the ACC defensively, offensively? Is this a middle of the pack Duke team now? Is it a young team? What can UVA fans expect to see that hasn't had a chance to see them on TV yet? And if you turn it on while they were playing Miami most recently, you got a totally different view of Duke than what we've used to seeing. What can we expect out of this crop of Blue Devils coming into Charlottesville? When
I look at them, they've lost 7 games. 5 of them are road games. 2 were neutral site games. They win at home. If this game were in Durham, it'd be a different game. They win there, but they struggle on the road, and not just losing games. You mentioned they got blown out by Miami, 22-point loss. They got blown out by NC State last month, 24-point loss. Lost at Clemson. That was a key loss for them. They're 8-5 overall in the ACC. But that said, this is not. I wouldn't call this a middle of the pack Duke team in the ACC. Right now, they'd be in 6th place right now, but they're a half game behind, tied in a loss column with NC State, and really just 2 games back of the leaders in the ACC. But that said, this is not a team that's going to win the ACC this year. They'd have to run the table down the stretch, and that would include beating Virginia on the road. Looking at their schedule, they have to beat Syracuse. Syracuse has been good at home. Syracuse is nothing on the road this year, but they've been pretty good at home. They'll at least make that a game. They'd have to beat NC State at home, rematch. They would have the advantage at home, but they got blown out the first time. And they'd have to beat Carolina again, this time on the road in Chapel Hill. So they're not going to win out. They're going to finish. They're 8-5 right now. They're going to finish with 12 or 13 in the ACC. From a standpoint of where they are in terms of NCAA tournament potential, they're a solid 7 or 8 seed right now. Their net and their Ken Palm rankings are both in the low to mid 30s. They're a team that's going to be, they're going to be around. They're just not going to be, I think coming into every season when you have the top 1 or 2 or 3 recruiting class in the country, in this one and done era, Duke fans expect to see them as a 1 or 2 seed. And this is not that kind of a Duke team. But that said, there is some talent, not as much as had been thought. Kyle Filipowski is an interesting guy. He came in, he wasn't even close to the top guy in that recruiting class, but he's emerged as the top guy on the court. 7 foot, 230 pounds. He can float the perimeter. He can score from the outside. He's only shooting 28.9% from 3, but he's kind of a volume shooter from 3. He can get hot. He can, from out there, he can create some matchup problems. And the fact that there's a twin tower kind of effect with him and then Derek Lively, who's not played a lot this season, but he's coming off his best game, which, for a Duke big guy could be modest. He had 11 points and 6 rebounds in the loss at Miami. He had 4 points and 14 rebounds and 8 block shots against North Carolina. He's not much of a threat, certainly, to score in the post, but he'll clean the boards. He had 5 blocks against Miami, too, so he's had, I count now, 20 blocks in his last 4 games, 13 in his last 2 games. That'll be a challenge for Virginia just because Virginia likes, Reese Beekman and Kihei Clark get to the rim, and that's sort of their ability to get to the paint with the way Tony has tweaked the offense this year. They're not running move or block, or they're not running the motion offense almost at all. They're running a lot of sets that free up the guards, the point guards, to penetrate the lane and either create for themselves, create for the little pocket passes for the bigs cutting to the basket, or create those shots for the perimeter. If Duke can take away the shots at the rim, that might bottle Virginia up a little bit there. So the ability there of Lively can be an interesting something to watch for, I guess, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. But other than that, Duke plays 9 guys. They're playing 9 guys. Jon Scheyer's playing 9 guys in his rotation this year, and he's not getting a lot of productivity out of any one guy except for Filipowski. But without having watched them play this season, he's got some guys who can get the hot hand and do some things in a certain one specific game. So they can be a danger in that respect. They just it's a young team that hasn't proven that it can win games away from Durham, and that's going to be the big problem for Duke, obviously, going forward.
Found it interesting when Virginia was playing NC State. I watched the game live, but came back and watched the recorded game and heard the announcers mention that this was the first time in, I can't remember how many decades, NC State was ranked and Duke and North Carolina was not. I can't remember what that stat was and how long, but it made me think, are we seeing the end of the Duke and Carolina dynasties? I mean, obviously Coach K isn't walking back into that stadium again. Roy Williams isn't coming back. And we haven't seen the same, it's early yet, but we just haven't seen the same type of kids or recruiting or energy in the short sample size after those legends have retired. Duke and Carolina dead.
I don't know about dead, but I mean, the ACC's been Tony Bennett's conference for a while now. Of the last 9 ACC regular season champions, 5 of them are Tony Bennett Virginia teams, and so Virginia has the most recent national championship. There have been 3 total ACC championships in that 10-year run that Tony's led. Duke won 1, Carolina won 1, Virginia's won 1. But Virginia's, they've been better record overall, better record in the ACC. The one bugaboo has been Virginia's not been able to beat Duke consistently, at least the Coach K coach Duke teams consistently. What's interesting about the Duke and Carolina are differently styled, differently recruited teams, differently put together teams. Krzyzewski went all in about 12 or 13 years ago with the one and done phenomenon. one thing that's a limitation there, they in Kentucky, as has been the case the last several years, had the number 1 and 2 recruiting classes. But, the NBA a couple of years ago started allowing high school guys to go play in the G League right out of high school with that G League Ignite team. And you're starting to see more of the actual top recruits who would have been a few years ago going to Duke and Kentucky are now playing with that G League Ignite team. And so even though the recruiting rankings still reflect that Duke and Kentucky are 1 and 2 every year, they're not quite getting the caliber of player. And look this year, both Duke and Kentucky are struggling mightily this year. Both are bubble teams. Actually, I think, Kentucky's very much a bubble team. Duke's on the right side of the bubble. I mentioned 7 or 8 seed, but Carolina is not built that way and has not been. I mean, not to say that they don't get talented players. It's just that they don't rely on one and dones, and it's actually kind of rare for Carolina to have a one and done guy. They have not really traded in that realm during this era. Carolina is constructed a bit more like Virginia with Tony Bennett's constructed. And that was the case, a carryover from Roy Williams. Veteran guys. You can recruit guys and develop them, and they're going to be there for 2 or 3 or 4 years. Look at this year's team. There's no shortage of experience and depth on this year's team. And so what's the question about Carolina just this year is, and maybe let's take it to the last 2 years. They were a bubble team this time last year, and they actually were until late in the regular season. If they hadn't won that game at Duke and ruined Coach K, the first time they ruined Coach K's retirement, when they won the last game in Durham, then they won the game in the Final Four too. But if they hadn't won that game, they might not have been in the NCAA tournament. And then they won 5 games in the NCAA tournament, got to the championship game. They come into the season, preseason number 1. The question isn't maybe why this year's team is struggling. It's maybe, what about that aberration last March and early April? That 6-game run is what now stands out as being the outlier as far as things go, because they were a bubble team last year. They're a bubble team this year, except that they won 5 games in March and April of last year. So, I think this is already Tony Bennett's conference. And, obviously this year, Virginia's tied for first. There's 4 teams with 10 wins in the ACC. Who had that parlay, by the way, Jeff? Talking about things you can look into here. The ACC right now is Virginia, Pitt, Clemson, and Miami. They'd be the double buys right now. They'd be playing on Thursday, their first game in the ACC tournament. Not even the most rabid Pitt, Clemson, or Miami person had them in there, much less those 4 teams outstripping then Duke and Carolina. Carolina and Duke are playing at this stage. They're definitely playing on Wednesday down in Greensboro. It's a topsy-turvy ACC, but I think this is just the start of things to come.
I'm wondering if the combination of NIL, the combination of the transfer portal, the combination of losing those 2 giants in coaching, which would give them living room access that that Shire and Davis may not be able to get, if it really is going to signify a change in the ACC moving forward. It's been Tony's conference for a while, but does now this become just, who knows who's going to come up? I mean, was it Boeheim that made the comment that Pitt pretty much bought this team that they've got now? And
they didn't. He's overstating that by a mile. Pitt does not have the money to buy a team, but what they're doing and what Wake Forest is doing is sort of it's similar to what Duke has done for these years with the one and done. Just that they have a different approach. Pitt, Jeff Capel and Steve Forbes, the coach at Wake Forest, they're not targeting their recruitment efforts at the elite high school players, because they know Pitt's not going to land 5-star guys. They're not going to land 5 5-star guys. Wake Forest is not going to land 5 5-star guys. But what they can do is they can work their transfer portal. And they can, and that's what Wake did last year. Wake, and this year they've got their best players, and both teams' best players this year are guys that played a year or 2 or 3 somewhere else. They they probably weren't highly recruited when they came out of high school. They got better somewhere else, and then these guys are saying, "Hey, come play in the ACC, play for us." And So it's different, but it's also very similar structurally to what Duke has done for all these years, the one and dones. Maybe the only advantage is, when you're recruiting, like think of that kid last year, Alondis Williams, the weight kid, who played there for a year. Guy was 22 years old, going on 23. He was a man. He was, he was a 6'5" guard. Played bully ball. He was a point guard, had his hands on the ball the whole time, and just basically just backed guys into the lane and took them to the basket and got fouled if he didn't make the shot. Whereas the Duke kids are probably more talented, but they're 17 or 18 years old. So, 17 or 18-year-olds versus 22 or 23-year-olds, that's a formula that can kind of work out my way if I'm Steve Forbes or Jeff Capel. So I don't know the NIL. Boeheim saying that it's laughable to suggest that Pitt and Wake Forest are throwing money at guys, NIL money, that is, at guys, and luring them to come play for them. But what they have to offer is playing time. And, you also have to, though, you have to sacrifice what you do as a coach with your team. You've got to just roll the ball out there. You can't, Tony Bennett is Virginia has not been a part of the transfer portal process. Obviously, Ben Vanderplas has been a very important addition this year. Last year, they got Jaden Gardner and Armand Franklin. But he's got to be very judicious because, nobody's just going to walk right in and play the pack line defense or play the offense, the really intricate sets on offense that Virginia runs. You can plug a guy or two into your rotation. You can't start over every year with 5 guys. We saw a couple years ago a very talented team with Sam Hauser and Trey Murphy, both who were putting up big numbers in the NBA this year, but they were both first-year players in that 2020-21 season, and that Virginia team lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament, had an 18-7 record overall with a ton of talent because that year, coming off COVID, they had 2 new guys in the starting lineup who had to learn all season long how to play in Tony's system, and it just didn't work. But if you're a Jeff Capel, a Steve Forbes, and you can keep it simple. Honestly, Kevin Keats keeps it pretty simple at NC State too. Jeff, you were there. I don't know that I saw them run too many plays. They have guys who can score, and they try to beat you one-on-one. They can't beat Virginia's guys one-on-one, but they can beat most teams one-on-one. That works to beat most teams. And so if you're Jeff Capel or Steve Forbes, I like what they're doing there. They're giving themselves the best chance to win. They're not going to keep guys for 4 years. They're not going to recruit 4- and 5-star guys and keep them for 4 years and win that way. The only way they're going to be able to win is the way they kind of stumbled into, by recruiting guys off the transfer portal and giving them playing time.
Let's look at forecasting the last 7 games and the logjam you referenced at the top of the ACC. Short of winning out, what does Virginia have to do to finish the season as the #1 regular season champ in the ACC? How many losses can they take, and where do you see the biggest pitfalls in front of us? Is that pitfall tomorrow, or is it somewhere else?
I would say it's the game at Carolina. Not writing off Duke. It's going to be a tight game, but I think Virginia's got the firepower to win that one. And then after that, it's Louisville, Notre Dame, at Boston College. Don't overlook Boston College. They swept Virginia Tech this year. Then it's at Carolina, Clemson at home. I like that one being at home, and then another one with Louisville. Virginia doesn't even have to play great basketball to go 6-1 down the stretch here. To be blunt about it, hold serve against Clemson. That's your toughest home game. I think that's a tougher home game than the Duke game tomorrow. But hold serve and win your tough home games. Even if you even write off the Carolina game as a loss, which I don't want to do, but let's just write that one off as a loss. 6-1 down the stretch gets you 16-4 in the ACC. And so, really what Tony and the team are. They want to win a championship. You like hanging banners, but you really want the double bye. So as long as you're in the top 4, you're pretty happy. If you don't have to play till Thursday, you're pretty happy. And I think that the way this schedule lays out, it'll be hard for them not to be a top 4 team going into the tournament.
And I find it interesting that if they, the interesting map of going through Greensboro for the ACC tournament, and then if you land a 1 or 2 seed in the Eastern bracket, you could play on those same rims again.
Yes.
In the first round of the NCAA tournament. So to get a high seed at the regular season to advance to the championship game in the ACC tournament could put you on the same rims and sleeping in the same hotels and beds. I don't know if there's an advantage to that or not, but it seems like a path to follow to get you into the Sweet 16.
Oh yeah, Virginia definitely. I mean, Tony Bennett would love it, just from a management standpoint. If they can win the ACC regular season, which is very doable at this stage. Even just get to the ACC tournament, even get to the semifinal. I mean, but get to do well down there in Greensboro. Be the best team in the East, at least a 1 or 2 seed. Yeah. And right now ranked number 8 in the national polls, they'd be a 2 or 3 seed in the big tournament. But if you can play yourself into a solid 2 seed and make it so that, your path is Greensboro, which is very travelable for Virginia fans. They have, Virginia fans have filled up Greensboro in both ACC and NCAA tournament situations before. Raleigh has also been a great place for Virginia in NCAA tournament situations. Easy 3-hour drive down for most folks from Central Virginia. I remember the 2014 ACC tournament championship game. 80% of the crowd that day against Duke. It was 20,000 seats, and it was 17, 18,000 Virginia fans there. Orange, it was like JPJ with just a few more people in it really that day. And then, if you can win those 2, you set yourself up to go to New York. Virginia, a short train ride. Get on the train in Charlottesville, get on the train in Richmond, and head up to New York and get ready for that. So no, that you want to have the ability to travel light, for your team standpoint, but then also have some fans in the house. I mean, Virginia lost the game in the Sweet 16 to Michigan State back in 2014. But man, oh man, there were a lot of UVA fans there that night. I couldn't believe when I looked around. Virginia played the second game in that session, and I think the first game was UConn. UConn and Iowa State, I think, were the first game that night. And the crowd was like that place was half empty. I'm like, man, this is amazing. UConn's only an hour away. I can't believe there's this few UConn fans here. And then about halftime, the orange people started showing up. And it's like, now I see what happened here. This is UVA. This is a big UVA crowd. So, you'd love to have the lighter travel for your team, but also then the ability for your fans to be there and make it loud on your behalf. If you can make them as much home games as possible, and Greensboro and New York could do that for you, that gives you just a little bit better chance. Virginia in 2019 had a reverse situation. We did go down. First 2 rounds were in Columbia. We didn't have a lot of people in Columbia. Columbia's a 7-hour drive down, past Charlotte. And then in the second weekend, those games were played in Louisville, which I think that bracket included. Now Virginia had to beat Oregon. Oregon didn't bring any people, but the other side was Purdue and Tennessee, and whoever was going to win that game was 2 hours away from Louisville, and it was Purdue, and that was a road game. I mean, that was the worst road game you can ever imagine. So that made that game even tougher. In addition to the fact that kid was making every shot he threw at the rim that game. So you want to avoid that if ever possible. That's why this last regular season stretch is definitely critical for Virginia.
What's on deck for AFP? You've been you've been prolific in the podcast. I sent you a note a week ago going, what's going on? What type of podcast you dropping? And boy, you almost one a day.
Yeah,
here lately, which is great, with some post game with Scott and your time with Jerry, and then some observations yourself. What can fans expect this weekend from AFP?
Well, tomorrow very busy. I've got one more preview coming up of Duke, just kind of breaking down Duke a little bit like we did here, just a little bit more depth coming, looking at their roster and what they do and how they score points and that kind of thing. And then looking at the projections from the metrics websites like Ken Palm and Evan Maya and Bart Torvik. So we'll do that. That's the traditional preview. And then tomorrow it's just, like everybody else, let's watch the game. And then afterwards, I've had great success with the post-game observations column that I do. I try to find 5 things from the game that then I can then, write a couple hundred words each on and figure out, what the story of the game was that way. Then we'll have Coach Bennett and whatever 2 players they bring out. That's probably more Sunday, and we've had success too, even though we're way out of football season. We're getting closer to the start of spring practice. So we've been catching up with the latest in Virginia football, mostly losing guys, mostly, losing your starting quarterback, your middle, all ACC middle linebacker, your all ACC cornerback, that kind of news. But we're trying our best to, at least let people know what's going on with the football program. And I got a couple more pieces coming up probably early next week about UVA football to kind of look at, kind of where things stand with the football program, year 2 of Tony Bennett coming up.
Well, I appreciate you allowing the opportunity to pick your brain, and hopefully it's an enjoyable experience for the listeners. And I would encourage listeners, if they have thoughts, questions, how would they get in contact with you? If they had a topic or a question, how would they reach out to you?
So one place, if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube today, the comment section there, I monitor that closely. I usually have some nice back and forth with some fans who comment, and some of those lead to columns, some of those lead to stories, ideas, and that kind of thing. So the comment section here on YouTube for those who are catching us there. Also, there's a comment section on the Augusta Free Press website that I also have. Somebody's got to monitor this stuff. I've assigned myself that role. But you can also email me at chris@augustafreepress.com.
Sounds good. Well, an enjoyable Friday late afternoon, and we look forward to seeing how Virginia handles the visiting Blue Devils on Saturday at JPJ.
Thanks, Jeff, for your time. Thanks to the listeners out there, and wahoo wah.